Good afternoon or good evening, everyone. We're going to be starting shortly. We're allowing time for more people to join us. Okay. Nick, I'm making you the host.
Sounds good.
Great.
You're set as a co-host.
Thank you. We are live on Facebook, and we're also going to be recording this session. So now as others join us, they'll get that message. We're going to be starting shortly. We're just giving a few more people opportunity to join us, both on Zoom and on Facebook. Colleen is joining us all the way from sunny Mexico. Aren't we a little jealous? Guess I should, I could let her talk until we're ready to get started. Colleen, see if you can unmute yourself. You can't?
I can now.
Okay.
Hi, Nick.
Hey, how are you?
I feel like I'm living the life, but I couldn't miss this. I don't care where I am. I couldn't miss this.
Oh man, I really appreciate you dialing in.
Yeah, I had to be here for it. It's a wonderful topic, and I know you're going to do it justice.
I hope so.
Yeah.
So we'll just give it another couple minutes and then we're going to get started. Thank you all for joining us. I'm going to mute all, and Darren and Nick, please unmute yourselves.
Should be all set.
Darren, you're still on mute.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for coming. Um, so for those of you who are on here, I don't know about your experience with social media, but in the past year, I would say, I've gotten so many notices from people saying, if you got a friend request from me, don't accept it, it's not mine. I didn't send it. Or I get these videos saying, you know, you're in this video, and somebody will say, if you get a video from me, don't open it, I didn't see it. There seems to be a higher number and a constant barrage of attempts to take control of people's social media, emails, and and other attempts of communication electronically. So when the Office of Information Security contacted AARC about doing a program on how uh, advocates for racial justice can protect their voices, we jumped right on it and said, most definitely, it is something that we are interested in, something that our community needs, and we would be more than happy to co-host with you. And so, our co-sponsor with you. So, on behalf of the Office of Information Security, the African American Resource Center, and Penn's Campaign for Community, we welcome you to this program, Protect Your Voice, Cybersecurity Training for Racial Justice Advocates. Our presenter today is Nick Falcone, and he is the University of Pennsylvania's Chief Information Security Officer. Nick has spent the last decade working in information security in Philadelphia's not-for-profit sector. Prior to coming to Penn in 2018, Nick led the information security functions at Einstein Healthcare Network and Thomas Jefferson University and hospitals. Nick was also on the information security team at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Before moving to the not-for-profit sector, Nick had a career in information security consulting after getting his start as a civilian employee of the Department of Defense. I have enjoyed, I just met Nick the beginning of, the end of July, I guess.
Mhm.
And, already in our conversations, I've heard some things that I have been able to put in place to help to protect my information. So I know that we're going to get some valuable information. We have everyone muted, but if you have any questions, if you use the chat function, I will share those questions. If you're on Facebook, you can write in their messages in Facebook. And we have Darren Tolliver will be monitoring Facebook. And so we'll be feeding any questions or information that you would like to Nick as we go through this program. Again, thank you for being here. We welcome you. Nick, thank you for being so willing to share this information and being here. And I turn the program over to you.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Dr. Allen, and thank you for that warm introduction. And, really thank you for your partnership. We've all, I think, been looking for ways that we can make a positive impact. And, this was one that I couldn't have done without you and AARC, because while I may have some knowledge I can put in some slides and talk about, I don't have any way to really reach out and get in touch with people in the same way that you already have that voice out in the community. And I really appreciate you helping me get in touch with people and be able to have this conversation. And also thanks to the Campaign for Community again for sponsoring us with a small grant to help us get started and get the word out about this presentation. So I'll jump right in. We've got, let's see, what's the best way to make this go? Switch this. So we have a pretty, it's a packed agenda. We called out that we might spend about 90 minutes, but we're going to try to leave a decent amount of time for questions and conversation. So don't hesitate to put those comments in, and we'll have more of a dialogue. That way we'll be talking about things that are useful to you as the audience of the discussion, instead of my guess as to what's going to be useful to you. But we're going to go over just some brief introductory slides, some context, and then we'll talk about sort of the assets that I think are important in an IT operation for racial justice advocacy. But you tell me. Then we'll do some conversation about something we call cyber threat modeling, or just threat modeling. And that's basically just figuring out what could go wrong. And that helps guide what you do to prevent those things from going wrong. And then when we talk about ways to prevent what can go wrong, we'll talk about how to secure accounts, devices, and then some spot tools that you can use to do solve particular problems. So jumping into that introduction, the goal here is really just to give you tools that you can use to stay safer. But there's a lot to go over here. If this stuff was what was naturally interesting to you, you'd probably, you wouldn't want this basic presentation. You'd say, oh, I know all this stuff, which is another way of saying this can be a little dull. So to that end, we've included a lot of pieces of, I just arbitrarily picked abstract expressionist type art. And we've got images from the Museum of Modern Art, the Whitney Museum of American Art, UC Berkeley Art Museum, Pacific Film Archive, Baltimore Museum of Art, and the Guggenheim. That tends to brighten things up a little bit. Many, though not all the artists represented, are people of color. And, just trying to provide some visual interests, but that way you won't be wondering, why does he have that strange image on this slide? There's no real connection. It's just so that there's something beautiful to go with a topic that's so dry. So what does cybersecurity have to do with, the topic of racial justice and advocacy and dialogue? And really, to me, I came to this topic because I realized since moving to having Penn as my employer, and Penn is very committed to the idea of open expression, that I realized that I became much more comfortable being sort of more open and outspoken than I had been in previous roles. And in part, that's because of the way that Penn treats employees as an employer, but also, the principles and values that Penn holds. But it's also in part because, I was thinking of the other things that let me sort of speak out. And a little tiny slice of what makes it easier to speak out as somebody at Penn, and what I do as my day job, is try to protect Penn people from cyber attacks, because those cyber attacks can cause all sorts of problems. But they can also silence people's voices or make them less willing to speak out. And some of that can be direct. People can retaliate on you with a cyber attack instead of some other kind of retaliation. You can be harassed online. And then even just the threat of somebody listening in on what you're saying or monitoring you can cause self-censorship. And that's a way that, that sort of preemptively silences you. And then on the really practical side of things, a lot of cybersecurity is about preventing people from stealing, material assets like money. And, money, we all need it, right? So if you can't pay your rent because someone stole your rent funds, or, your advocacy organization has its donations stolen, that disrupts your ability to be an advocate. So those are the kinds of things we're trying to prevent. And that's the little angle, the cybersecurity is just one little tiny thing that can support advocacy, but it's the only thing I know about. So that's what I was hoping to get the word out about. And then I think an important piece of context as we go into this conversation is twofold, right? One, you don't have to do that much to be really a lot safer. Especially, by the end of this presentation, I'm going to give you a top 3 and say, hey, we went over a whole lot today, but if you do these 3 things, you're going to be a tremendous amount safer, and none of them are really hard. They're slightly inconvenient, and to me, it feels a lot like a safety belt, right? Getting in your car, putting on your seatbelt's kind of annoying, but we mostly all do it. And it does make you a tremendous amount safer, right? If you're going to be in a car accident, having your seatbelt on just makes you a tremendous amount safer than it would be to not have it. And it wasn't that hard to do. But I think on the other side of that coin, it's worth knowing that, it's not like you put on your seatbelt and then you say, hey, I can do whatever I want in my car, I'm safe. We all kind of have that idea where that's ingrained in us. We know that that's safer isn't the same as perfectly safe when it comes to, say, cars. But it is the case that, these tools make you safer, but none of this makes you perfectly safe from any of the threats that we're talking about. Because, no matter how expert you are at this stuff, there's always some way to get around it. So it's just useful to keep in mind that this is risk mitigation, not perfect safety. So jumping into the topics that we wanted to go over, this first one's really short and sweet, but I did want us to all just take a moment and think about all the ways technology interfaces with our ability to engage in discourse and to engage in advocacy. I think social media comes to mind immediately, but we also coordinate and talk to individuals through email, text, instant messages. Many folks have a website that they use to get the word out for whatever organization or group that they're working with. And then there's the laptops, phones, and tablets that we all use to access all of those kinds of technology. And then there's the data that sits behind all of that. So, it doesn't really matter if it's an email or if it's in a Google Doc, the data about sort of who you're working with or who's assigned what or who your donors are, whoever you're working with, whatever that data is, that data is one of the assets that we're thinking about. And I just bring this up because sometimes it's easy to focus in on one aspect and say, "Oh, we're just talking about laptops." You say, "Oh no, laptops and phones." Well, laptops, phones, tablets, and it's not even just those. It's the data that's on them. It's the websites we access with them. It's the ways we get our communications out. So we're going to try to cover all of that. And obviously, that's more than we can easily cover in 90 minutes. But just keep all those things in mind in the back of your mind when you're saying, "Okay, how do I going to protect my voice?" Well, first I need to protect these digital assets so that I can protect my digital voice, because these come together and your voice is sort of an emergent property of having all of these things be secure. And so with that in mind, we're going to sort of step into this idea of threat modeling, which is a vaguely technical term. It's just really what could go wrong. But we use that when we model these threats and we figure out sort of what it is that's going to go wrong. We use that to then figure out how we prevent that. And the reason threat modeling is important is that one person's threat model is probably very different from another person. That could be because our own individual risk tolerance, where somebody says, "I don't care if that happens," and other people say, "I really care if that happens." And also just who or what might happen to you is different for different people. Some advocates are working with vulnerable populations. Other advocates are, out in public. Other advocates are trying to keep their advocacy private. And all those differences, and whoever might decide to interfere with you, may give us different threat models and mean that we should take different measures to keep ourselves safe. So when we do threat modeling, we typically start out by saying, so what are those assets that we have? What am I using as, that I need to protect? What are my computers? What are my online accounts? Where's the data that I care about most? And, some of those are going to be more important. So, for me, my phone, I need my phone. If my phone doesn't work, I can't do anything. You need your bank account to be secure just to be able to, deal with anything else in your life. And then, I have, my email is important to me but I don't run a website, right? But if I ran a website, that'd be important to me. And then once you sort of have those assets in mind, then we consider who or what could harm those assets. So who's going to bother me? And we'll talk a little bit on the next slide about who that might be. And then what tools, tactics, techniques, procedures are those folks going to use to bother me or interfere with my activism? And then what vulnerabilities, in my assets or my posture on the internet are going to let them, use those tools, tactics, and techniques. And then we'll use all that to just try to align our plans to what problems might happen. And so when we think about threat actors, we've got a big list here. And I think some of these probably spring to mind immediately, and others, maybe we don't think about, or they're not on everyone's threat model. So, for instance, employers, my employer's not really on my threat model generally, because they're happy to have me here. That's a great thing for us to be talking about. But some people's employers might say, well, we don't want you out in the public, or your employer might have a very a different point of view than you do, and so it might be important for your employer not to become aware of your personal advocacy. Same thing with landlords. People sometimes get into all sorts of strange mix-ups with landlords who, when the landlord gets too involved in their personal life and becomes too aware of it. Activist trolls and extremists, we've seen a lot of that where people disrupt all sorts of different activities using, a variety of techniques. And, I think for different people, some of the unjust actions of law enforcement are on their threat model, and we should be thinking about that. And then, in the last, say, 4 or 5 years, this whole international troll farm, information warfare specialist, this sort of Russia 2016 type stuff, that's become something that we have to think about. And it's very strange to me that that's, it's still a new frontier, but often you have people, coming from that sort of a background who are professionally trying to disrupt dialogue, cause strife, cause division. And that can be a real factor in how we go about our cybersecurity posture. But the one that I think would be the most important to call out are cyber criminals. And the reason that's important is I think a lot of times we think of that as something separate from what could impact our advocacy. But cyber criminals do a multi-billion-dollar business each year, and it's professional business, right? There's people going and clocking in somewhere and doing work as cyber criminals, and they're making a lot of money, and they're not making it honestly, right? They're stealing it from people like us, and that's we have to keep an eye on the fact that maybe 99% of cybercrime is driven by cyber criminals, right? So all these other issues that could come up, that's probably 1% of the bad things that might happen to us. Maybe 5%, who knows, right? We don't have great numbers, but by far and away, a lot of this is going to be cybercrime. And cybercrime can interfere with your ability to, be an advocate for racial justice. It can silence your voice online as quickly as any of these others. So we should really keep that in the front of our mind when we're doing this kind of threat modeling, and make sure that whatever steps we take protect us from cybercrime as well as these other more specific threats. So and that's all the time we're going to spend on the who, but let's talk more about what. And we're not going to go over every possible way somebody could, ruin your day, but we'll just talk about some of the ways that are most common and some of the ways that maybe you haven't thought about or heard about. So I think one of the things, if you said, what's a bad thing to happen to you from a cybersecurity perspective, viruses would be in most people's top three. And I think it's worth thinking about viruses though, because I think when we all got to know, viruses, most of us, sort of met them in the 90s or early 2000s, and they were annoying. They made your computer unstable. You get all these, your computer would restart, it would run slow, and they weren't super serious, right? Like they were really inconvenient, but you never heard of anything really terrible happening from a virus. But virus makers became professionals in the last, decade or so. And so viruses don't crash your computer very much anymore. They don't make your computer run slow because all those things make you get rid of the virus, because then you start looking for it. And viruses became a lot more pernicious in the activities that they do. So now, a virus on your computer will steal every password that you type and send it off to the bad guys. Viruses might some of them will steal your banking information, and then try to run a transaction in your bank account while you're logged in that you won't see. Because while you're typing, oh, just view my balance, it's telling the bank, hey, send this money overseas. And then it's faking back to you that you're looking at a normal screen on your banking website. So they can be really disruptive, is what I'm saying. And they're not as easy to catch as they used to be. So and forgive me, the next couple of slides are going to be where we talk about these are things to worry about. There will be a part where we get to all the solutions, and this is why you don't need to worry about them and how you can fix them. So don't think it's going to be all doom and gloom as we go on here, just because it starts that way. And then the other kind of virus I wanted to just talk about a little, because this isn't on everybody's radar, is ransomware. And ransomware is just a kind of virus that it'll lock up your files that are on your computer or whatever device it gets a hold of, and you can't get them back without paying the virus author. And sometimes you pay them and you still don't get them back. And so this has become a really profitable business for the virus folks. And so they've been doing a lot of it, and it's really a pain. So the thing to think about is, and we'll talk about this a little bit later on, but mostly with ransomware, you want to have a good backup of important files. And whether that's just the pictures of your grandkids, or that's your donor list or your other information, if it's not, if it's on your computer, the virus can get to it. So you want to have it backed up maybe on a USB drive you keep somewhere safe at home, or on a second computer, something like that. So it's just worth keeping an eye out for that, because it can be really disruptive. And then another one that I think we all got to know, phishing, which is these deceptive emails that try to trick you into something. We all got to know those through sort of these really dumb phishing emails that are kind of, you say, who falls for these things? But that's the sort of the tip of the iceberg for phishing. It's the part you can see, because the people who are sending these sort of obvious scams, they're generally sending like a billion emails, and they're just saying, hey, I'm going to get most of these will get blocked, but some will get through. And if I deliver 6 million emails, I'm going to get to somebody who's either easy to trick, because 6 million people is a ton of people, or I'm going to get to somebody who's having a really bad day, right? You get to somebody when they're really busy, and they get this message that says, oh, your inbox is full. I need your password or else we're going to shut off your email. But 5,999,000, are going to say, what? I know that's fake. But one person's going to be saying, oh my gosh, the car's pulling up. I got to leave right now. Oh no, they're going to shut down my email. I can't have that. Okay, here's my password. Just deal with it. And so they trade in volume. But I think they tend to give us this impression that phishing emails are easy to avoid, because there's just so many of them. And how could you fall for this stuff? But that's, like I said, that's the visible part. The sneaky phishing emails, if somebody comes for you, then it's a lot harder to dodge that phishing email. I'll give an example. An executive I was supporting at a prior employer got phished and got this ransomware, because they said, hey, open this document. And I guess maybe before I get into the example, it's worth saying, the way they get you, some of these things say, hey, send me money, I'll send you money back. That's not what I'm worried about you falling for. It's that most computers can be attacked pretty effectively by just opening an email attachment. You open that PDF, you don't have the latest patches installed, the PDF takes over your computer. and it starts encrypting your files or stealing your passwords or causing other problems. Similarly, just going to a website. Websites can attack your computer. So or when you try to go to the website, they say, hey, look at this document. You're in this video. Dr. Allen made the point. And they say, oh, shoot, it said to go to the video. It said it's a Facebook video, but I must have logged out of Facebook. I have to log back in. But you're on a fake login page. And it looks just like the real login page. And now they've stolen your Facebook password. So it can be much harder to spot that kind of attack because they're much sneakier. And some of the lures, like I was going to say, are really tricky. So this executive often ate at a restaurant near her home, and the restaurant would email you a receipt. And one day she gets a receipt from the restaurant that, she hadn't been there. She said, I wasn't there on Tuesday. Why did I get a receipt? So she opens the receipt and it's blank. She says, that doesn't make any sense. I'll have to call these guys later. But she's a busy executive. She moves on to doing other stuff. Not too long later, all the information that she could access, which was a lot, was encrypted. Now we had good backups, so we just got rid of the virus and replaced the encrypted data with the backup data. No big deal. But somebody went to a lot of effort to make that happen, right? They either successfully impersonated that restaurant or they broke into the restaurant's email system to use the trust that this particular executive had in that restaurant so that they could attack her computer. And you'll see this all the time in some of these more targeted attacks. So when you get a message from somebody, they've taken over their account and they say, hey, look at this video. That's because they're abusing that trust that you have in that person and trying to get you to be, the next person who falls for it. And then they'll abuse people's trust in you. So phishing is really tricky these days. You have to be kind of paranoid to, don't trust an unexpected email that seems weird. And if you do get an attachment or a link to a web page where you say, like, this isn't what they said it was going to be, call that person, reach out to them and say, hey, did you really send me this, or do I need to do some cleanup on my computer?
Nick, is it any way to tell when you get those kind of things, whether or not it is real or not? Or is it just that you have to wait until you open it and realize it? Like, is there some way at the beginning?
So it's a great, I really appreciate this question. So the typical way, if it's an email, one of the tricks that they use is you can make your name and email anything. And, on a phone or something, it'll just display the name. So, I can be Dr. Allen tomorrow because I just changed the front part of my email that's sort of before the email to say that I'm Dr. Allen. But then my email will still be the same. So if the name doesn't, so you have to hover over it or click on it in a lot of email clients to make it show the real email. And as long as they haven't taken over somebody's account, generally speaking, you'll have the wrong email address will be there. You say, oh, that's not right. But sometimes, it's coming from the real person's account. So then it's hard to tell. So sometimes if it's suspicious, reach out to that person. The bad guys have their email. So if you email them, they'll email back, or if you Facebook message them, or whichever way you got the suspect message, sometimes the bad guys are waiting there and they'll say, oh no, it's real, you're good. But let's say you can't get a hold of them, or it's somebody you don't know well. So you say, well, I'm not sure if I don't have a good phone number for that person. I only know them on Facebook. There's safer ways to open something to figure out if it's good or not. So we'll talk later on about some devices that are tougher devices. So generally, like iPhones and Chromebooks are a good place to open an attachment you don't trust. Or if you preview an attachment in Gmail or in Google Docs, instead of like downloading it and opening it, if you just click on it once and it kind of comes up and the rest of the screen's grayed out, that's a pretty safe way to open an attachment. It's harder to visit a website in a safe way, but generally, this is I'm going to paint a lot of things in broad strokes today. So if we have any other cybersecurity people who are listening in, I apologize for all the generalities. We're trying to get to the big picture. Generally, opening it on your phone is safer than opening it on a computer, and it's especially safer on an iPhone or a Chromebook. And then one of the other techniques that I think isn't on people's minds necessarily is what we call a password spray. And basically, the hackers have been breaking into websites and stealing people's passwords for a long time now. And there's big lists of all the passwords they've found out there that they've seen people using, billions of passwords. These websites are real fast, so you can try to log in repeatedly. And so if I take the top billion passwords and I shoot them at your account, if your password's not really good, I'm going to get in. And that's, we all feel like we're unique, creative people until we try to sign up for a username on a service that's been around for a while. If you're a real 1 in a million type person, well, there's 300 other people just like you in America, right? So it's the the numbers game works against us here. So if you have a kind of normal password, it's easy for these guys to break in. So later we're going to talk about how to make your passwords, unique and strong, and so that you can actually remember and use them. And we're going to give you tools that are actually pretty convenient. But if that your password is not that great, this is what you're worried about. And then just we've talked about this already, how people use the trust in one person to attack another person. And that's, I think it's worth talking about these misinformation campaigns, because that's really become popular. All these different countries are involved in this now. They got these bots and different, people online that are fake people. And they also use taking over real accounts to promote fake messages. So, some people might be thinking, I don't do much online. This is interesting, but it doesn't really apply to me. But people trust you. Somebody trusts you. And that person's trust is worth stealing. And so that's why your social media accounts, your email, even if there's nothing in there, but the people's trust in you is worth stealing and using in these misinformation campaigns. So, you can sort of think like, my accounts don't really matter. But if you started sending a message the day before the election and you were saying, hey, everybody, our polling location changed, well, suddenly your account's really valuable to somebody who wants to suppress votes. So it's just worth keeping in mind that some of the bad guys out there are pretty clever, and they're up to really no good, and it makes it worth taking over accounts that you wouldn't otherwise think are important.
Okay. Nick, I have a question. There's a question posted. So opening some suspicious emails is how the virus attacks our systems, correct?
Yeah. So to go into it, basically, PDF documents, Word documents, most kinds of attachments can be, so the email itself typically okay when you just look at the email, but documents that are attached to the email or hyperlinks in the email that take you to a web page, the web pages or the documents can attack your computer and take it over. And we'll talk later about how to make your computer a tougher target for those kinds of attacks. And we'll talk about some devices that are harder for those kinds of attacks to work on. But yeah, that's why people always say, well, don't click on stuff. I know you have to click on stuff like that's, you got to click on the link to get, you have to trust some people, you have to get your job done, you have to do your work, you have to communicate. But that's how they try to attack you, is with those bad link or a poison document. And so we'll talk a little bit about how to make sure those things don't work. But if it's a suspicious thing, confirm and see if the person really sent it to you. If your brother sends you something and you say like, he doesn't normally sound like this over email, call them and check and say, did you send me this? And say, oh no, somebody's broken into my Facebook account. And then otherwise, if you have to open it and there's not a good way to confirm, opening on an iPhone, or even to some degree, mostly Androids are better than say a Windows PC or a Mac, but there's some nuance there. Chromebooks are a great place to open a suspicious attachment. And then, or like I said, if you put it in if you save it to Google Docs and then you preview it in Google Docs, so you don't open it the whole way, but you just open it in Google Docs short version. That's a safer way to view documents compared to other ways. Like we say, this is like seatbelts, safer, not safe. And then, another one that I wanted to bring up, because there was more reporting about this a couple of years ago when there was a legislative initiative that didn't ultimately go through, I don't think. But currently, the laws around email are really weird. So emails and other messages, once they've been sitting out there for 180 days, because like if you're in Gmail, you go to whatever computer you want to go to, you talk to Gmail, and then Gmail shows you all your emails. All your emails that are in there for more than 180 days, or it doesn't matter what email service, those emails can be accessed without the oversight of a warrant by law enforcement or anyone who wields the power of law enforcement. And that's just a quirk of our laws that, that probably shouldn't be that way, but that's the way it is. So it's worth just knowing that email is not as private as we might initially think. Like, there's still paperwork, there's still oversight, but it's not like a warrant that requires the same level of oversight. And later we'll talk about Proton Mail. If that sounds like a problem to you, Proton Mail is a potential solution. Who knows what I've done here? Let's see. There we go. And then one last one that I think we hear about, but I wanted to put a little bit more, I guess maybe second to last one, put a little bit more form around, is people talk about mobile devices, phones being tracking devices, and they tell people where you are, and you say, what does that mean really? And I think that's worth talking about a little bit, right? So mobile devices your phone knows where it is, and it knows where it is basically all the time that it's powered on. And many third parties also know where your phone is. So the cell phone company can tell where your phone is by which phone towers it talks to, and they keep that information for a long period of time. Google, even if you're not using an Android phone, Google owns the Android operating system or makes it. But even if you're not using an Android, iPhones, a lot of different apps on your phone. So whether it's Google Maps or whether it's something that's totally not Google branded, is built with Google tools. And those Google tools tell Google where that phone is. And so Google has a record of essentially where every phone has been. Um, and then there's more specific tools called stingrays that are like a fake cell phone tower, and they can track all the cell phones that are near them. And sometimes they can be used to do weird attacks on cell phones that you don't really need to worry about, but they can basically track all the phones near them. And so between all these things, that means that there's a variety of ways for somebody to figure out where your phone is and therefore where you have been. So something like a Stingray will do that in real time, but these, the cell phone companies track you, retrospectively, and it's a classic like private investigator trick right now to either the cell phone companies sell that information, so you can just buy it, and like 3 different times they've been hauled before Congress for just selling the information to just about anyone, and they keep saying, "Oh yeah, we're going to fix it." They haven't fixed it. So it takes just a little bit of lying or a little bit of shenanigans, and anyone can buy this data. Or you can have law enforcement, or again, anyone who wields the power of law enforcement, can use a geofenced warrant to somebody like Google, and they can say like, okay, tell me everyone who was on this block on these 2 days. And we've seen times, so there was this article recently about a guy whose running route happened to take him by, I think it was burglaries or a murder or something like that. And so he got, arrested, and they said, oh, he's probably this criminal. And he's like, no, I just jog every day, right? So you can get dragged into these investigations unreasonably. And we know that this kind of warrant gets exercised around protests sometimes, or other types of activities that garner law enforcement attention. So
So,
it's just worth knowing that, like I said, some of this isn't law enforcement at all. It's repo men looking for where your car is, or where something that they're trying to get is. It's people working for lawyers in custody and disputes cases. It's private investigators. It's perpetrators of intimate partner violence. So this kind of information can be pretty dangerous, and it gets into a lot of the wrong hands. So it's just worth, if it's important that somebody not know where you are, then it's important that your cell phone be off whenever you're there.
hey,
Yeah.
question. So there's a question that's asking, are there viable alternatives or off-grid, less commercial options for information exchange that could mitigate this level of threat or surveillance? And if there are, can you recommend any? And so the question is, can we really protect our information,
Mhm.
or is just the cost of being online or using social media that we're going to be surveilled?
Yeah. So I guess there's sort of 2 pieces to that, right? One is the social media aspect, and then the other is the phone aspect. From a phone perspective, I think it's best to just say, hey, my cell phone always knows where it is. Because like, even if you say turn off the cellular network on your cell phone, a lot of the location tracking equipment will say it'll see all the, when you turn on, you look for a Wi-Fi network, you can see 5 or 6 different networks, and some of them have funny names, some generic names. Well, companies have gone and they've collected every Wi-Fi network in the country. And so if you can see 5 different Wi-Fi names, there's probably only one place in the country where those 5 different Wi-Fi names overlap. Right. And so they, even with your, you're not talking to any cellular tower, the phone still knows exactly where it is. So it's really hard with a powered on phone for your location to remain truly private. And so I think you could go into a lot of sort of advanced techniques, but short version, your phone always knows where it is when it's turned on. On social media, the tracking is slightly less pernicious. Social media generally knows where you are, even when you're not logged into social media. So like Facebook tracks where you are on the internet, even when you're not on Facebook. And getting around that is difficult. So there are tools and technologies you could use. We'll talk later about the Tor browser. And that's a way that you could be much less tracked when you're online. And that'll hide your physical location and who you are when you're working online and talking to people. Now, if you log into a social media account, then the social media knows who you are, but it won't be able to track you elsewhere on the internet quite as easily. So there are some options in the social media space or just being on the internet space. If you're not on the, but where your phone is, there's no sort of silver bullet for that I could recommend. And then one last one that I guess maybe I keep saying the last one and it's not. Another one that I did want to talk about, because I thought otherwise we'd sort of people would say this seems missing, but you hear about the slang for doxing, which is just short for documents. Or releasing somebody's documents, so releasing public information about somebody, their name, their address, where they work. And you see this as a threat or a way that people harass people. And this isn't most of the activity here isn't really cyber activity, right? This is just harassment of people using publicly available information. But there's a couple sort of cyber angles we can take on this. I will say that using social media truly anonymously, especially if you're posting pictures, is really hard. You see people have their, an anonymous account, but then their identity is revealed because there's a, one of those checkerboard-looking QR codes in the background on a shipping label, way in the background of a picture. And people say, oh, I zoomed in on that, and that contained your address. There was people remember there was a big kerfuffle about a guy hoarding all this hand sanitizer in like Kentucky at the start of the pandemic. And he there was an interview with him on like I forget which news media outlet, and it was him standing in front of a storage locker, just one still photo, and you can see that he's got all this hand sanitizer. And in like an hour, somebody figured out, so they said, oh, I know he's in Kentucky. Let me Google all the storage companies in Kentucky, and I can see what color the building is painted just in the corner. It's yellow and blue. So which storage companies have yellow and blue color schemes? Okay, it's only these two. Now I'm going to Google all their locations. Great. Now I'm going to look at aerial photography of all of those locations, and I'm going to compare the background of his picture and the lines on the parking lot behind him and figure out where he was standing. And they could tell you the exact storage locker he was in an hour. So it's very hard if somebody is doing this kind of research to stay really anonymous if you're posting pictures and engaging. But you can make it a lot harder on people to try to figure out where you live and those sorts of things. Some people take this really far, right? If you buy a house, your name is on the public property records. So people incorporate a corporation and they have the corporation buy the house for it. I'm not getting into the real paranoid stuff here. But if you're worried about your name and address being easily available, Google your name and address. You'll find all these web pages that list people's names and addresses. And most of them have a takedown option where you can say, hey, unlist me from your website. And you can, Google your name and address until nothing comes up again anymore after you do all these takedowns. But they'll keep putting it back occasionally. Your new websites, these kind of scammy websites come up. So what you can do is you can set a Google alert where if you have a Google account, like a Gmail account, you can, you want to just Google how to do this, but you go and you basically set a Google search that's going to run every day, and Google emails you when the search finds something new. And so that way, every time you put in your name and your address, and every time your name and address gets reposted to the internet, you get an alert and can do a takedown. And that way, amateurs just saying, hey, I want to find out where this person lives, they'll have a much harder time. Another way to sort of help limit the ability of people to figure out more about you is if you use the same username on every site or even the same email address to register for every site, it's a lot easier to track you across the internet, especially usernames. So if you have a separate activity that you want it to keep separate from the rest of your life, use totally different email addresses for it, use different usernames, and that makes it a little bit harder to connect the dots between, say, we've seen this before. Somebody have an anonymous Twitter account, but somebody go to the password reset function, and Twitter will tell you like, okay, we're going to send a reset email it'll be the first 3 characters of the email address and then the last 3 characters. But with that, if you say, I already suspect it's this person, then you can figure it out because you might know their email address and it would match. So, but long story short, this is pretty hard. There's some good guides out there from the Electronic Frontier Foundation, would be maybe where I'd start. There was a good article in Wired by their leader a little while ago, so maybe start there. But those are the easy things you can get done in this space. And then another one to just keep an eye out for is when you're doing a big meeting like this one, it's easy enough to have participants be disruptive to the meeting. And Zoom, the platform that we're using in part today, made that a little too easy at the start of the pandemic when Zoom became a really a big platform. So they got this activity of annoying people this way called Zoom bombing. But this is pretty easy to limit. So one of the reasons that everyone's muted today and we're doing the questions in a moderated fashion is because if we're going to talk about Zoom bombing, then I'm a paranoid lunatic and I got to be like, oh, let's make sure that nobody can, unmute and say something awful, or that they, you can disable screen sharing by participants so that somebody can't share an offensive image and we all see it. And almost every platform, and it's not just Zoom, anytime you can do these kind of big meetings, being able to control who's sharing what is the way to limit this. The other thing is for private meetings where everyone's going to be able, everyone's able to talk, everyone's able to share their screen, everyone's on video. It's important that you not post the links to those private meetings places that are public. So even if you just tweet a link at a couple of your friends and nobody's, you got 6 Twitter followers like me, I'm not on Twitter, but I don't have any social media followers, but you tweet, you say it's only these people are going to see it. Well, there's people who scrape all of Twitter and they look for links to meetings like Zoom links. And so even if you're not tweeting at somebody else could see it if it's posted in a public place. Or if you're putting it just on your website, it's easier if you email it to specific people or some more limited list of folks. That way you have more control over who gets that link. Because with most of these platforms, if you have the link, you can join the meeting. It's also good to use a waiting room. That way you can let people in on purpose. And if you kick somebody out for causing trouble, that way they get stuck back in the waiting room. Zoom has an option that you have to check to make sure that kicked out participants can't come right back in. I think that's checked by default now.
So I have 2 questions. One is, what is the name of the Wired article?
Oh man. So I do not know off the top of my head. If you look for what to do about doxing and Wired and EVA, I'm forgetting the great woman's last name, he leads up the Electronic Frontier Foundation. It's just a short article, but it has some good links. And it's a good place to start with. It's more about sort of, and she links to another article that's more about sort of how to react once you've been doxed. And so there's some good sort of, how to lean on people for support, what you can do. But yeah, there's some good advice out there that gets into more depth than I think we have a chance to here.
Someone found it and said the name of it is What to Do If You're Being Doxed.
That sounds like it.
Yes. And then the other question is, a few weeks back, the Big Four testified in front of Congress. Were there any key takeaways for non-techies that we should be aware of from that testimony?
As relates to this topic, I don't think so. They didn't get too much into a lot of what happens in these congressional testimonies ends up being pretty high level, and they pay a lot of lip service to each other. So I don't think there was any big shift in sort of the way things are in the tech world based on those conversations.
Okay, thank you.
But great question. And then actually the last one, I wanted to just put digital forensics on people's minds. And this is basically using technology to examine a device thoroughly. So people can look at a phone or a laptop or a tablet, and that can reveal messages that were sent or received, web page history, deleted documents, contacts, basically anything that's on the device or that was on the device. And that's because when you delete information on a computer, generally the computer is very efficient, right? It wants to be fast and responsive for you. So if you have a document and you delete it, that document was stored on whatever storage medium the computer used, and so the computer doesn't go and clean it up. It just says, hey, that area where that was stored, that's ready to be used again. And whenever I need more space to store something, I'll drop it on top of that old document. But in the meantime, that document basically lives there. So the computer tells you, it's gone, forget about it. But it's still on the hard drive of the device, and you can pull it back off with the right tools. And so it's worth keeping that in mind, especially the place where this really gets most people is, you go to sell an old device to somebody, if you sell your old laptop, it's still got your tax return on there, even though you deleted it. And so every once in a while, somebody will make a news article out of this by buying laptops off of, eBay and reviewing them and seeing what interesting private information is on there. You can do the same thing for phones or anything else. And we'll talk later about a tool, BleachBit, that can be used to, clean up a device before you, give it to somebody or sell it, so that this data is not still on there. Great. And so let's see. I should check what time it is. How much time do we have left? There we go. Okay, great. Yeah, we're about on schedule. So we'll just talk through some of these additional good topics. If I can get this thing to advance the slide, we'll see if I get there.
Nick, I would like to ask you a question if it's possible.
Yeah,
What do
please.
you recommend as the best online virus protection
So I like
for the, for a typical
yeah.
home PC or laptop?
So as we're going to discuss in a short bit here, for if you're running Windows, which is the main platform people think of when they want to run antivirus software, you got to be running Windows 10 these days because the other versions of Windows aren't getting patches, and we'll talk about why that's important. And Windows 10 comes built in with a Windows Defender, and honestly, it's great. It doesn't cost anything extra, and it works really well. If you need to check a file and you say, hey, is this file bad? There's a web page called Virus Total. So that's another way you could look at a document. There's pluses and minuses to this, but if you say I don't trust this file, or I don't trust this website, you can put the URL in this web page called Virus Total, and it'll run a scan with every the top 100 virus products out, antivirus products, and say because a lot of times one product will detect first before another will, and then 6 weeks later they'll all know about it, but there's always new bad stuff coming out. So that website lets you test it against all the virus products. But yeah, for Windows users, I like Windows Defender. If you need something else, Symantec still makes good software. Malwarebytes makes good software. I think both of those are sort of good, straightforward products. That you can check out. They're not bad. So let's just run through accounts briefly, because they have some different capabilities and concerns. But we already talked a lot about why protecting your accounts is important. But I think it's also, we probably didn't mention like your utility company, your phone company, your phone account, like your iCloud or your other sort of phone backup. If you do online backups, those are important to protect those accounts too. So especially like iCloud backups, or how remember a while ago a bunch of celebrities had like intimate photos stolen. It's because they were stealing online backups from iCloud, and you could steal them from any other online backup system. So basically protecting those accounts is important. Is the short version there. And so my profession collectively has been very bad about passwords and giving you good advice about them. Forget most of what you've been told. Make it long, make it unique. And you're good. And we're talking a little bit about LastPass. That's a way to make it actually unique, because it's hard. Nobody can remember all these passwords if they're all different, but they got to be different. We talked about password sprays as one reason. The other reason is that people break into a website, and they say, oh, I broke into this website. I'm going to steal all the passwords and usernames. And now I see that your username is your email address and I got your password. Well, I'll try 700 other websites and see if you have an account at any of them with the same username and password. And if you're like a normal person, the answer is yes. So it's important that your passwords be unique. We'll talk more about that later. And but short version, make your passwords long. If they're 20 characters long, it's a good password. If they're not, it's a less good password. If it's 8 characters, it's not good. For your phone, we'll talk, stick with that 6-character numeric code or whatever. We're fine there. We'll talk more about how to make that secure later. But just make it long, make it unique. But passwords are still bad, right? People can still steal your password. A virus on your computer can log that password, without you knowing about it. So the real cure right now is multi-factor authentication. So if you do online banking, this is where the bank texts you a code before, and when you try to log in, you have to type in that code. And the goal there is that way, if somebody steals your password, they probably didn't also steal your phone. And so when you get that number, you're proving that you still have your phone, and then you can get in. Now, I can use a fake login page to try to trick you into giving me that code when I'm trying to log into your bank, from a phishing email that you thought was from your bank, but it's not. There's ways to get around it. You can steal somebody's phone number, but it's seriously 100 times harder to steal an account that has multi-factor authentication than just a username and password. It stops so many attacks dead in their tracks that it's ridiculous. Seriously, you do one thing. This is the thing. Go to all your accounts, your email, your social media. They all have this option, but invariably you got to go to my account, security, scroll down a ways, and then there's a checkbox to hit for enable multi-factor authentication, and it'll either use your phone number, or the better way to do it is if you can run an app like Google Authenticator, and that just has the code show up automatically, and that way you don't need to get a text, and that way if somebody steals your phone number, they can't steal your your accounts with it. There's also a product called YubiKey, or Google has a Titan key that's the same kind of product. Those are a little bit fussy to use these days, but if you want a really secure product or way to log in, check that out. But really, just turn it on, use the default options, and if you listen to this whole talk, you do that, you'll have come out way ahead. It will stop so many different account takeovers and attacks. And then, we talked a lot about why devices are important, but if they have your device or they control it with a virus, or, they have physical control of it somehow, but really if they take over the device, they can get your data. You can have this really secure email program. Well, they can still read the emails because they control the device. So with this, there's another, maybe probably the second thing to do, and we'll do a summary at the end, but, update your device, keep it patched. So that's why I mentioned Windows 10 is the only Windows you should be running. If you're running Windows 7, it doesn't get patches anymore. And those patches, sometimes they change the way things work and it's kind of annoying. But most of the time, most of these companies, the patch comes out every month and it's got a dozen, or more, sometimes 50 different security vulnerabilities that it closes. And so if you don't run those patches, you don't let the device restart, you ignore it, that's 50 different ways somebody can break into that device a lot of the time. And then maybe only a dozen are really easy and the other 40 are kind of hard, but yeah, you got to run the patches if you want your device to be secure. It's another one that's like a big one. If you were doing this and you were using multi-factor, you're in the cybersecurity top 10% already, right? You're a much harder target. But yeah, if you're on Windows 7, you can still upgrade for free. Microsoft stopped advertising it, but you can just Google like how to upgrade for free. There's a Microsoft site you go to, you download the upgrade kit, and it runs and it keeps all your files and programs. Really worth it. Later, we'll talk about some specific devices. And one of the criteria for making a device a good cybersecurity device is that it gets patches. And actually, the Android operating system is pretty tough. It's a good security operating system. But most vendors, you buy your phone from Motorola or Verizon or whoever, and you buy an Android, they get the patches from Google, but they've customized it for the way that your phone works, and they don't bother sending you the patches. So your phone rapidly gets out of date, and then now there's ways that people can break into your phone. If they are sending you the patches, it's a different story, but most times they're not. And that's the thing that holds Android back a lot of the time in this conversation. The flip side of this is keeping all this stuff up to date is kind of annoying. So the best solution is uninstall it if you don't need it. And I called out 3 things here that I know you don't need anymore, right? Flash, that's going to get turned off by your web browser in a month anyway, or a month or 3. I think it's December. But if you have Flash enabled, you can disable it. If you're getting prompted for Java to need patches, figure out, uninstall it. You don't need Java for anything anymore, in my opinion. But generally, nothing will break. Get rid of it. Same thing with Adobe PDF Reader. Bad guys love to attack Adobe PDF Reader because everyone has it. You don't need it anymore. Google Chrome, the web browser, opens PDFs just fine, as does Google Docs. And both of them are a lot harder from a security perspective. They're just tougher things. Similarly, if you installed a browser extension a while ago and you're not using it anymore, uninstall it. People tend to take over old browser extensions and use them to attack people who have them installed. So if, some of these browser extensions are great, like uBlock Origin, that's great for blocking web ads that, I don't want creators to get paid, but ads are used to deliver malware sometimes on web pages. So until we figure that out, I'm going to block them. So, there's good add-ons to browser extensions and add-ons to use, but if you're not using it anymore, get rid of it. And so I've previewed this a few times. Chromebooks and iPhones are great security devices, both because they were built from the ground up to be security conscious, and they get updates regularly. Android devices that get updates regularly, like Google Pixel phones, are also really good, but that's not most Android devices. And I will say that, so that's also the most expensive Android devices are the ones that get updates, which that's a real digital divide problem that I think we need to work on our vendors and make them be more responsive and treat security like something everyone deserves. I will say congratulations to the Chromebook. You can get a cheap Chromebook and it's as secure as an expensive Chromebook. So I love Chromebooks as a platform. They're easy to use. They do all the web browsing and Google Doc type apps that you want, and they're tough as nails from a security perspective.
Okay. Nick, I have a question.
Yeah.
What is the, I know that Microsoft has started or updated their, is it Edge or Explorer or?
Yeah, it's Edge now. They have both,
Right,
but
so
Explorer's the new one.
I would ask, what is the preferred, because there's so many from Firefox, Chrome, Edge, what is the preferred web browser that will offer the best protection, you think?
Firefox, Edge, or Chrome are all good choices. You're not going to be in a terrible spot with any of those. I don't think many people use Edge right now, and I think it got a bad rep because Internet Explorer was so rough. But I also don't use it. But it has a good reputation from a security perspective. Chrome is very security tough. It's not as privacy conscious as, like, say, Firefox. Whereas Firefox is a little less hardcore about security, but it has some cool privacy features. Like it has this like a box that you can use Facebook in, and it doesn't let Facebook figure out the rest of what you're doing, right? So it's got some cool features like that. I really like Firefox.
Yeah.
But yeah, Firefox, Chrome, or Edge are all good choices. And then there's plenty of the other niche browsers that aren't as popular that are also solid, but any of those big players are good these days. Safari is also a fine web browser on Mac.
Safari, yeah.
As long as you're keeping the device up to date and running the updates when they come in, any of those will serve you really well.
Speaking of updates, there's the multi-factor authentication or the updates and patches.
Mm-hmm.
No, I'm asking what is, I guess, the best method.
That was
so.
I'm sorry. Let me explain that. I was actually answering a question when I wrote that, but you had some information about multi-factor authentication, and you had another site that you could use.
Oh, yeah. I'm gonna just skip back to it because it's easier than trying to.
YubiKey, is that
yeah.
it?
Oh, YubiKey. Okay, I see that. Yeah.
It's like I don't have one on. I keep one on my keychain. It's like a little USB plug, and instead of getting a code that gets texted to you, you just plug that in and you touch it, and it does the same thing, and it does it in a way that's very hard to hack. I guess a really hardcore security option, but not every website works with it. It's a little, but if you want a little like a lightweight project that makes you feel like you got to put on like a dark trench coat and some like Ray-Bans while you're working with your computer, it's the right tool. They're a lot of fun. They're really tough from a hacking perspective. Because one of the ways you steal somebody's multi-factor authentication code is that you trick them into trying to log into a fake web page. And then, so I think I'm logging into my bank because I got an email from my bank, but it just looks like it's my bank. And in the background, they're taking everything I type, and the bad guy's logging into my bank. So when he goes to log into the bank, it prompts it to send a code to me. I give the code over to the bad guy. Game over, right? But with the YubiKey, it checks who I'm talking to, and it confirms that it's the bank. It's the real bank before it'll provide the code for the bank. So now I haven't worked with a bank yet that'll let me use one. Like you can use it for Gmail. You can use it for the tool LastPass that we're going to talk about later. I think you can use it for Office 365. So you can use it for some services. They're getting more popular. And then this is the last big section of this conversation. It's just highlighting a couple different tools that you can use in the same way that we just talked about YubiKey. Here's some cool things that you can use. They solve specific problems, and check them out. I think some of them will be pretty valuable. So my favorite one on this list probably is Signal. So Signal is a messaging app that's really security oriented. And it works just like any other text messaging app. It works a lot like WhatsApp because the creators of Signal are some of the original creators of WhatsApp. So you can make phone calls with it. You can send texts. You can have group texts. But it's really, really tough from a security perspective. It's hard as nails. So the advantage of this tool is that nobody listening in on your communication can figure out who you're talking to or what you're saying. And that's really nice. And then you can use a disappearing messages option. So when you start a conversation with somebody, you can go and set the settings for that conversation and say, oh, hey, like set the messages to expire in 2 weeks or 1 day or whatever you want to set it to. And that way, if they lose their phone, it gets stolen 2 years from now, they don't have a good passcode on it, somebody opens the phone and starts reading their messages, those messages aren't there anymore. And so that combination of features of tough encrypted messages that are really, really good, really well encrypted, it keeps your conversations really private. And so I really like that about it. The challenge with trying to use something like Signal is you got to get everyone you want to talk to use Signal. And that's trickier, right? So WhatsApp really is pretty good. It's almost as good as Signal. So if you can get people to use WhatsApp, then use WhatsApp. If you can get them to use Signal, all the better. The disadvantage of WhatsApp is that it's possible for somebody to discern who you're talking to and who your contact list is. And sometimes just knowing who you're talking to is as important to knowing what you're saying. So, if you said, oh, hey, if somebody knows that you're going to meet up with some people later, well, if they know who, and then they know who you're talking to, well, then they know who you're going to meet up with, right? So sometimes that metadata, that data about the data, is just as important to protect, and that's where Signal becomes really a good idea to use. Another one, so on the email side of things, we talked about how email stored in the United States has certain limitations to the privacy laws around it. Well, Proton Mail is a security-oriented email service that's located in Switzerland, where privacy laws are really strict. And it was designed from the ground up. This was built by some of the scientists at CERN, those guys with the big Large Hadron Collider, that, the physicists. And so it's a free service. You would want to turn on two-factor authentication to use it in a good, secure way, the same way you should do for your Gmail. And then this is email that also enforces good cryptography on email. Most emails encrypted. This is always encrypted. So it's well designed from that perspective. And it's built so that it keeps your email very private. So if you want to use email and you are worried about somebody breaking into your email or wielding somebody with access to the powers of law enforcement, Proton Mail can be a good way to keep that email secure. And then we talked about BleachBit a little bit before, but this is basically if you're worried about somebody, you're selling somebody your old laptop, or you're worried about your files are still going to be on there because you deleted them, but it doesn't really delete them like we talked about. BleachBit is the tool that you can use to delete those files because it basically writes a new file on top of everything. So when you run it, you select there's a free disk space option, and that's going to delete all the stuff that's already been deleted. It's just going to go and delete it again in a secure way. And so this is a great way to get, and you can also delete individual files. So like you finish your tax return, you save it where you want to save it, you want to get it off of this device. You can select your documents and you can select shred with BleachBit and it'll destroy that particular document, which is nice because wiping all of the free disk space, you got to let it run overnight. It takes forever. This can also be a nice efficiency boost for your computer because you can clean out old junk. So like the last time I ran it, it freed up 2 gigabytes of space on my laptop. So I like to run it regularly just to keep things freed up because lots of different programs hang on to stuff that you don't really think they're hanging on to. So it'll have all these options down the side of all these different programs. And I'll say, delete the stuff this program's hanging on to, delete the stuff this program's hanging on to. It's usually worth doing. Though some of those options say like, if you clicked all the options under your web browser, it would delete all your bookmarks too, right? So you don't really want that. It'll make you, it'll delete your saved logins. So that, be careful what you click, it'll explain what each one is, but free disk space is the main option you need. And then, you can recover a lot of disk space using the other options. Great. And we hinted at this earlier. The challenge where I was saying, hey, have just really long passwords. I mean, they can be sort of semi-human readable. So, right, like pick 3 or 4 words, string them together, add a few numbers. That's a good password. Maybe make 1 or 2 of them not real words, but kind of words. Really great password. But how do you remember all those if they're supposed to be different? Like I told you why they're supposed to be different, but this is how they can be different. So there's these password manager tools. I recommend LastPass. It's what we happen to use at work. 1Password is also a good, it's the same kind of tool. Also really solid. But these basically, it's a lot like the remember my password function in a web browser, but you can put the same tool, like I have this tool running on my phone, on my Chromebook, on my browser, at my work computer. And that way, if I, type a password for the first time, on my phone or on my computer, then my phone will also know it. So it synchronizes my passwords across all my devices. But, you have to use my thumbprint to get into it, and it stores the passwords in a really safe way. If you try this and it's a real pain, just use the remember my password function on your browser. That's less safe. I'd be really amazed if somebody broke into LastPass and stole passwords out of it. Sometimes people they figure out ways to break into browsers and steal passwords. So that's why I'm not recommending that as the go-to tool. But, it'd be better to have your browser remember your passwords than it would be to have passwords that are the same. And some of you are saying, well, I use this password on websites I don't really care about. I'm like, yeah, okay. And then I use this one for secure websites. But then it only takes one of your important secure websites to have a breakdown where you've lost all of them. So it's sort of all your eggs in one basket philosophy when you share passwords like that. And I know on the other side, somebody's saying, but if I put all my passwords in this tool, then I'm trusting this tool. Yeah, you are, but it's a security tool from a security company. It has a good track record. if somebody breaks into this, they're not going to go after your password unless you're like, because there's a lot of really good passwords in there. So you'll hear about it before, you know, something bad happens to you. But it's all your eggs in one really good basket, and it protects you from the avenue of attack that's most commonly used, where people are breaking into these websites and stealing passwords. You can use multi-factor to protect LastPass too, so that you don't have to, you know, give it a unique password, but also use multi-factor so that it's hard for somebody to break in there. You can use Google Password Manager or Google Authenticator to do that, so that you have a little code that you type in each time you log in. And if this has been, if you're sort of like, he says a lot of stuff, check out this website, haveibeenpwned.com at the bottom of the slide. That's a guy, Troy Hunt, who's like a security industry reporter. All these different hackers, when they get a hold, you know, sort of good guy hackers, when they get a hold of one of these stolen password data sets, they send it to him and say, hey, Troy, check this out, put it in your database. And so he has of known breaches. Now, so it's not going to be every breach, but all these times that somebody got broken into that he found out about, he gets those passwords and he keeps on in this big database. So if you put in your email address, it'll tell you all the times that some website was broken into where you had an account and your password was stolen. So if you put in my email address, there's 5 or 6 different websites, you know, it's, oh, hey, you had a LinkedIn account in 2013. They had a breach there. And so it can be really kind of startling sometimes when you put it in and it's like, oh man, I didn't know that account, those guys got broken into, and I didn't know those guys got broken into. So it's sort of, you can start seeing that pattern where people break into these websites and steal passwords. And it's kind of a cool website. So, and on one hand, earlier I was saying, don't have your phone with you if it's important that people, you know, that your location stay private. On the other hand, I do know that phone video has been a really important tool for changing the dialogue around racial justice. And so one of the challenges we've seen is sometimes phones get stolen or destroyed to try to silence that aspect of our voices. The ACLU has promoted this project called PA Justice. And they have a PA, you know, the NJ Justice. They have all these justice apps. Download the one that's right for your state. And basically you can videotape through the app on your phone. And then when you stop the video, it starts uploading it over the cellular network to the ACLU. So that way, if your phone gets taken, lost, destroyed, as long as there was enough time for the video to get uploaded, that video stays. And so that's a big upgrade. It sort of closes one of the vulnerabilities in trying to videotape something important and then being worried that that videotape is going to get taken back from you. And then we hinted at this earlier when we were sort of saying that, can you be online and be private? So the Tor browser is one answer to that. And the answer, you know, pretty much yes, with some big asterisks. It's hard to do, but you know, perfectly, but the Tor browser is a big step in that direction. So the Tor browser is this tool. Tor stands for the onion router. And that's called that because onions have layers, and this tool basically works by bouncing your traffic all around before it gets to its final destination. So that it bounces through all these different onion routers. So that way the destination doesn't know where you came from, and in some cases you don't know where the destination lives. That sounds complicated, but basically it's a regular looking web browser. It's based on Firefox. But when you visit a website using the tool, the website doesn't know your real IP address. And an IP address is kind of like your, you know, like your postal address on the internet. So, and if you know somebody's IP address, you know, you can track down where they came from, those sorts of things. So if you need to visit a website and you don't want anyone to know that you visited that website, the Tor browser is a good way to do that. Now, some websites, like I was accidentally in a Tor session trying to do something, and Home Depot won't let you go to their website. And that makes sense, right? Cyber criminals use Tor as well to hide their location. And I'm sure that they were messing with the Home Depot website. I think it was Home Depot. Maybe it wasn't. But, you know, some websites won't let you go there over Tor, but some will. And this project was actually started by our Department of State. And now it's a private, you know, a separate, you know, sort of not-for-profit corporation that supports it. But it was started as a counter-censorship tool for, you know, deploying overseas, so that it's popular in a lot of places with oppressive governments, so to get around censorship. And so, you know, it can serve that purpose domestically too. So we can make sure that nobody knows where you went. This is also the tool that you can use to visit .onion websites. So, you know, sometimes people say, oh, you're using the Tor browser. What are you up to? Because these .onion websites are what you hear people talk about as the dark web, because you can host a website that can only be reached through Tor, and then no one can tell where that website is hosted. So, and that doesn't really do us a lot of good here, but you know, so, but that way, you know, the other context for the tool, so that if somebody says, what are you doing? You say, no, I just want to be able to visit this website without somebody knowing that I visited the website. But this is a way to not be tracked very effectively on the internet if you want to be on the internet and not be tracked. Now, again, if you go and you get on Twitter while it's on it, then Twitter knows who you are, but it'll know you're using Tor, and Twitter won't know where you are. But since you also get on Twitter and log into that account from from home, yeah, they're going to put two and two together. But this would be an important part of if you wanted to be totally anonymous about doing something. Tor is a big part of how people stay very anonymous on the internet, but it's very hard to be perfect about that. And then similarly, Google, what they do is track you. That's their business. DuckDuckGo is a competing search engine that doesn't track you. So when you do a default, like a search, you type into the URL bar, whatever you want, wherever you want to go, and you search the web. DuckDuckGo is what Tor browser will use as a default. But you can use it in any browser. This can be useful if you don't want to record it, at Google or anywhere else about what you were searching for. And then it's also useful to get out of your bubble because Google tailors the results to what they think you want to see. And those would be different than what somebody else's results are. Whereas DuckDuckGo doesn't track you, so it doesn't customize your search results. And then I have just a list of topics that we're not going to get deep into, but just to keep in mind. And the first one is a mantra that I've seen elsewhere and that I really like. And it's compartmentalization is the root of all good security. And one place so basically this means keep separate things separate if they don't need to come together. And so the big play that you see this is if somebody doesn't need to know something, don't tell them that thing. That way they can't disclose that thing accidentally or on purpose. So you see that in like classification of top secret military stuff. You can only share it if there's a need to know. Well, that's a good idea if you're sharing other sensitive information at any given point in time, and that could be really mundane information, but something you want to keep private. That's the way to keep it private. I know that's sort of obvious to everyone, but it's amazing how often that's the thing that trips people up, and it gets people into trouble. The other way that this is important is that if it's really important that you have a really tight cybersecurity posture around, some activism activity, then it would be a good idea to separate it, your online presence for that activity and your IT assets for that activity. So, let's say you're gonna, you're running, an organization, and you say, I really don't want my membership in this organization to get back to my employer because people are going to harass me about this, and I just don't want I don't want the two to mix. And I don't want people bothering me on my regular Facebook. Well, get a separate computer, get a separate email address, and a Chromebook, a really good platform, really cheap second computer, and do everything for that one activity on this one. Never log into your personal email from that device, and never log into your activism email from your personal device. And say, if you keep them really separate, that makes, say you get a virus on your activism device. Well, that virus can't find out about your personal life and bring it back to you if your personal life doesn't exist on that device. So that's a very hard thing to make a lifestyle out of, but I want to put it out there as sort of a next step advanced topic if you're looking for something else. We talked about some techniques for anonymous social media and anonymous internet use like the Tor browser. Doing that really well against any determined adversary is very difficult. You should just know that the bar is set very high and most people don't succeed. So just go in with your eyes wide open if you're really relying on the anonymity of any social media account. Similarly, people always say, these are two things I thought I would get asked about, so I just wanted to sort of put them out there to dismiss them. Burner phones are really hard and only solve a really particular set of problems. People say, well, what's hard about a burner phone? It's just a different phone. Well, but if that phone's ever been in the same location as your phone, then we know who owns that phone, right? When they're both powered on. If it's ever been at your work and powered on, or at your home and powered on, well, then you know who lives at that house. There's a very small group of people who that phone might belong to. If you bought the phone with cash, sure, but how do you pay for your plan? You can buy gift cards and then you arrange for that. Well, every time you buy those gift cards or whatever you're using to pay for the plan, or every time you bought the phone, well, the security videos at the place that sells the phone, they have those for 90 days. So then you got to wait for that. It becomes a really difficult thing to do. This is more of a Jack Bauer movie thing than a real security technique for almost every problem. And then you see a lot of these virtual private network services that are advertised. These are services that they say, oh, hey, we don't keep any logs and we keep your traffic private. That's kind of true, but we've seen a lot of false advertising in this industry. And the VPN it's like they wrap a cryptographic tunnel, they call it, around your traffic, so that all your internet traffic leaving whatever device is using the VPN goes over to the VPN provider, and then it comes out onto the internet over there. So only anyone can tell about your IP address is, oh, it's at this VPN provider. But all they can tell about your internet address mostly, is that it's coming from Comcast today. And so right now you're trusting Comcast not to monitor you in ways you don't want. And now you're just trusting this who knows who VPN company to monitor you in ways you don't want. So you're still stuck trusting somebody, and it's a coin flip as to which one you should be trusting. So it's better to use sort of more direct tools like Tor or encrypted email or Signal for encrypted messaging, so that you don't care about who provides your internet service. You care about what you're doing on the internet service being safe. And then, like I said, it's a long presentation. There's a lot in there. We kind of overwhelming. It's recorded. You can come back to it. You can see it again in the future. But if you do 3 things, you'd be really safe. So enable multi-factor on your accounts and think really hard about which accounts you have and get them all. If you just do that, you'll be in the lead. If you enable automatic updates on all your devices and you run the updates when your iPhone's saying, I'm going to reboot tonight, it never does, plug it into your computer, get it to reboot, install the update. You'll be in really good shape. And then if you make your passwords unique and long, and honestly, don't use any of the technical tools. Just write them down in a notebook and keep them at your house. For most people, when they look at their threat model, somebody stealing passwords out of their house isn't a big concern. Write them down, put them in your wallet, you're good. Make them long and unique, and you're going to shut out a ton of cyber threats. Do these 3 things, and honestly, like I said, you're going to be ahead of most people, and you're going to become a hard target in a cybersecurity perspective. So, people have other questions, or we can chat. Let's talk about it.
Well, Nick,
I have a question that came on Facebook. And I remember seeing something about this earlier in your presentation about posting on social media about your positions on things and you not wanting your employer to know about it. So the question is it legal for an employer to fire you because of posts that you put on social media?
So I should say I'm not a lawyer. I'm definitely not an employment lawyer. But from everything I understand, so check with your own employment lawyer to get a real good answer. As far as I can tell, employment rights in the United States are very, very limited. And so there's not a lot of things that we're generally protected for being fired for. So, and I've seen a lot of people in the news get fired for posting things that generally, a lot of times it's stuff I really disagree with that they're posting. But I suspect it's legal, but we'd want to check with a lawyer to be sure. But for all these guys who you see losing their job for posting weird racist rants, and it's probably legal to fire us for who knows what we post. But I'm not sure.
question, Nick. If Google tracks your activity in searches on a Chrome browser, does Google also track how you use your activist Chromebook?
So the interesting thing is that Google's large enough that the different thing, like their different divisions work very differently. So like they're behind Chromebook and Android, and the design philosophy for both pieces of software is totally different. So Android had a rough start from a security perspective and has gotten a lot better, whereas Chromebook's been rock solid from day one. I have not done a deep dive on what and like Chrome, like I said, is not the most. It's very good security, but it's not the best privacy from Google. It's somewhere in there, but it's usually that's a good trade-off. I use Chrome, I use Firefox. I like both, but I haven't done a deep dive on what Google knows from any given Chromebook, but generally they don't track so much that it's more pernicious than say using any given web browser. But yeah, the recommendation for Chrome or any of these devices is more around the keeping somebody else from breaking in. It's tough on a manufacturer side. Sorry, that's kind of a weak answer because I'm not exactly sure. I would need to do a lot of digging to figure out exactly what they know from your Chromebook. But I haven't heard a lot of complaints about it, and that gives me, and I've seen them recommended by people who do that kind of digging. I would need to replicate that research myself.
Excellent. And again, we have questions. This is a time to ask them. No question is off limit for Nick.
Go wild.
And there are questions that, with cyber crime and threats that are occurring, now is the time to ask any questions around social media. Why do you keep getting these different profile requests from different people? what does that mean? Any question he can probably answer for you. So now, if you have any questions, now's the time.
And if you do have a question that you don't want to ask here, I'm glad to put my email address out here. It's already easy to look up online. So I'm nfalcone@upenn.edu, NFALCONE. If you put protect your voice in the subject line, I'll be glad to try to get back to you, especially, if you're, and if you have an activist organization and you're out there working for racial justice and you say, hey, can we talk for an hour? And just we can talk you through some things we're doing or some things we're worried about. I often do that kind of, just on the side consultation with people just to chat, see what useful advice I can give you. Feel free to reach out. That's my work email. So it's not, Penn's email is nice and secure, but it's a normal email address. So anything you say in there, is normal stuff. But feel free to reach out to me if there's, because this is a recorded presentation. You might not want to ask your question here.
We have a question, Nick.
Great.
If your Facebook account has been hacked, what steps should you take to protect your account and privacy?
So there's sort of two questions. One is like, how do you get it back? And a lot of times you can recover with Facebook. So you can say, hey, recover my account, and it'll take you through whatever steps. Probably you registered with a phone number earlier, and you can have that as your recovery option. And they have a bunch of weird recovery options that change all the time, but we're going to assume that you got your account back. So now you have to think, like, the person who hacked your account had access to it. So you can try to see what they did. So you can see your messages with other folks. Sometimes they'll deleted what they sent, but you can see if you have any weird messages you sent so that you can kind of try to retract them or do damage control. But it's going to depend on what's on your Facebook. So if you had, say, a bunch of private messages that were important, that they stay private, and now they're not, you have to look at those messages and see what actions you should take. In terms of sort of keeping the bad guys out the next time, it's often tough after a hack. One of the things about modern virus, so maybe they just stole your password with a bad link, but maybe they stole it with a virus. And so it's really tricky when you're not sure if you have a virus. Malwarebytes has a great malware removal tool that you can run on a Windows computer or another computer. And that tool can often find something. But paranoid people like me really often struggle in that situation because it's really hard to be sure a virus is gone. Because a lot of them, like a modern virus, kind of like there's a first stage that lands on your computer and then it downloads other stuff and then it really gets hooked in there. And if you get most of the pieces out, but not all of them, it can come back. So if you want to be sure, the only way to be sure is to reinstall your operating system, which sounds like a real pain. It's not the world's worst, but make backups of your data and just reapply your operating system. That can be really annoying. So that Malwarebytes tool is a good first stop. But if you want to be sure, that's the only way to be sure. And then for recovering your Facebook account, use a new password you've never used anywhere else, make it long, and set up two-factor, and that should keep people out.
We have a couple more questions and then we're going to have to wrap up because we are approaching 7:30 quickly. The one question is, could you repeat your email, because I wrote it down, but I think I left a piece out.
Oh, yep. So it's N as in, is that November? FALCONE. So that's Foxtrot Alpha Lima, Charlie Oscar November Echo @upenn.edu.
Okay, that's what I put. I just wanted to make sure I didn't mess it up.
Yep, no trouble. Like I said, put protect your voice in the subject line. If I got a lot of requests, it might take me a long time to get back to you. If I don't get many, I'll probably get back to you pretty darn quick. So, please do reach out. I'm really always looking to work with folks and try to make sure that everyone in the community who's working for the right things has the support that I can give them.
And so another question is, if there's only one software solution that you could acquire to protect your internet security and privacy, what should it be?
To me, it's Google Authenticator and put two-factor on your accounts. I mean, at the university, you can put we put two-factor on people's like main login credential, and we had a chart of how many times our accounts got broken into, and it was big numbers, and we put two-factor on everything, and it falls off a cliff to onesie twosie things that invariably are for the accounts that don't have two-factor on them, because there's all sorts of exemptions, and unusual accounts. But
Okay.
student, faculty, and staff have two-factor on their account,
Google
and the
authentication.
compromises disappear. It's incredibly effective. It works against people you would not think it would work against. Really tough customers who try to break in. It stops. Like there was an article from, I think it was from the FBI, talking about the bad guys. I don't have any direct experience with this, but the bad guys who broke in to the 2016 DNC government interference, election interference stuff. There's a military intelligence organization out of Russia. Like these are some tough customers. And the FBI said half the time, basic multi-factor authentication stopped their operations. And now nothing stops those guys. So, to me, one thing to do, multi-factor on your accounts. It made 90% of the tricks people use to take over Facebook accounts immediately stop working. Somebody has to really want to get you before they can get you around multi-factor.
Okay.
And then the last question that we have for this evening is, and you talked about this a little bit at the beginning, but why is this work important to you, and what motivated you to offer this service?
Great question to end, Dr. Val. Great question.
I really appreciate you asking. So, there's a comic on the internet called XKCD, and there's a one they did a long time ago, and it's just a joke. It's like a little stick figure comic, and there's a joke between biologists and physicists arguing over who's got the better discipline. And the physicist makes a bunch of jokes, and then the biologist comes in and he shows a chart of infant mortality in the United States and by year, and it's a chart that falls off a cliff. And he says, to the physicist, he says, the luminaries of my profession have slain a horseman of the apocalypse, right? And that's true, right? Modern science, modern medicine has done things that would have been literal miracles, not that long ago in human history. And that's what draws me to the not-for-profit sector, and what draws me to working at a place like Penn is that the power of Penn can really change the world on a big scale. And I feel really privileged to work at a place like Penn where I can have that kind of impact. And our provost, Dr. Wendell Pritchett, made a call to the community, and he said, look, we can't be successful as Penn, and Penn's mission is not limited to the Penn community. Penn is part of the Philadelphia community, and we need to be part of the dialogue on racial justice in Philadelphia, and we need to enable that dialogue and the participation in that dialogue for people out in the community. And so the thing that I like about my job, right, I know a lot of smart people, and I'm privileged to usually be the dumbest person in the room, especially at Penn, is that I get to help those people who can change the world in ways that I can't. So my day job is really satisfying because cybersecurity is kind of not, I don't know, it doesn't get, 100 years from now, nobody cares about it, right? But I can help people who will change things in ways that will matter 100 years from now by working at Penn. And in the same way, I wanted to give a little bit back to the Philadelphia community. And I call it a little bit because it's one talk, it's one conversation, it's one, I can talk to some of you over email. But if I can help you make changes to our society, the changes that I can't get done on my own, then that's a way to make these cybersecurity skills that ultimately, they don't do anything on their own, but they can help you do things that actually matter. So that's how I gain, that's sort of my purpose. That's what makes me feel satisfied with my job and with volunteering, is to actually help people get things done that matter. And I know I can't get that done on my own, but I'm hoping I can help you all get things done that matter.
Thank
Well,
you.
Nick, I want to personally
Wait,
thank
I'm sorry,
you.
Darren, before you close out, I know I said that was the last question, but
Oh,
I
yeah.
think this is an important question that somebody just typed, and
They keep
that
coming
is,
in.
should you log in at places like Starbucks or bookstores or fast food places where they offer free internet? Should you log into your computer in those places?
In 2020, yeah, it's free Wi-Fi used to be kind of spooky. Now, I mean, if you do these other things, they matter. I wouldn't worry about what Wi-Fi networks you connect to anymore.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Nick. You gave us so much information. I mean, we went over our time, but I'm pretty sure we had people with a lot of additional questions and things like that. And thank you for giving us your information that we posted. If I had a clapper, I would clap for you because you did an outstanding job. We want to thank you from the African American Resource Center for you for providing this service. And we just want people to know that it's still, we got a clap right there. We got people clapping for you, Nick. And we will have this is being recorded, and it'll be available on our Facebook page, which is African American Resource Center. And you can always go back and revisit this. So if you're missing something, it'll be there for you to see. Once again, we want to thank you for joining in with us, the African American Resource Center. We want to thank Nick Falcone, who did a phenomenal job, and thank Dr. Valerie Allen for actually helping host this for this and putting this thing together for us. Thank you.
both
We
so
also want
much.
to thank WURD as well for partnering with us and helping us get the word out to the community, as you mentioned before, Nick. Okay. So with that being said, we want to thank you. We want you to have a great night, have a blessed night. And from the ARC staff, thank you. And we will see you soon. Thank you for joining us. Have a good night.